Hey everybody, Jason Klamm here. Thank you so much for joining us. Apologies for several delays. I think I mentioned this previously, but lost a ton of episodes in a bit of a hardware issue and have yet to recover them. And that said, this is the one of the 5 interviews in which I actually have the important half left over. Not to diminish my importance as an interviewer. Anyway. That was meant to be a snore, but it ended up sounding like a snort, and I thought it was really, really funny. I don't think I'm that funny. Neither do you at this point. Long story short, thank you so much for all that. There's a whole bunch of wonderful construction going on next door. Now I'm a real podcast. And anyway, long story short, this is with the amazing and fun Dick Guttman. He is a press agent, as he calls himself. That is the term that he uses. He does not say publicist. He's been doing it for a long time, and he's done this for some amazing people. And so he has every right to call it whatever he wants. And there's some really fun stories on here. You can hear me in the background. That's fine. The questions are fine. They're I think I'm in the distance, but not so super far in the distance you can't understand what he's answering. And he's very clear anyway. Lots of super fun stuff. So that is about it. I just want to, real quick before I go, make sure to remind you to not just go to stolendress.com/celerysound to check out my sketch comedy record label. We're working on getting our first vinyl releases together and everything. Working on some other stuff that might come out within literally 2 weeks. Not on vinyl, but some other stuff that'll be on vinyl. And definitely check out A Gift You Didn't Ask For from Friends You Never Had. It's a wonderful album released only on vinyl. I did not even push them to release it digitally. They released it on their own on vinyl at first, and then I wanted to distribute it. It's wonderful. It's like modern day Firesign Theater. I know it's weird to put a promotion up top, but it's almost Christmas time, and why not show some love to these artists? These guys are wonderful. They did this out of the goodness of their hearts and the desire to make some very weird Firesign-esque comedy. It's a friggin' delight. So check that out. And now, without further ado, did I say further right? I don't think I did. Mr. Dick Guttman. I'm Jason Klamm, and this is the Comedy on Vinyl podcast. Welcome to the Comedy on Vinyl podcast. This week we are not talking about one particular album, but we are talking with Dick Guttman. Thank you so much for doing the show.
Well, it's my privilege, but it's also my area of interest because I had a great decade working with those people.
Yeah. Well, because I first emailed you asking about one of your clients. They were unavailable. And then I'm like, hold on, I know the man's name. And I had to look you up and do a little more research. And I'm like, there's no reason to not have you on the show.
Good.
So from the era of the greatest comedy albums, what are some of the people that you worked with?
Well, I don't want to be possessive about them all because most of those people, at that time I was working for a company called Rogers & Cowan. Rogers & Cowan was the biggest publicity firm that there ever will be. I mean, it was a man named Henry Rogers, started in the 30s, and Warren Cowan, who is really sort of the king, and he's the George Washington of publicity. And Warren joined him at the beginning of the 50s, or just when he got out of the Air Force. And what was happening then was that the studio system was coming apart. Hollywood had been run by the studios, and each one had their retinue of stars, and they developed their stars, including a lot of the comedy stars. And the studio system was starting to end. And so these people who had been publicized by the studio publicity department, which created such fanciful things from it, had nothing to do with who they were. They suddenly had to get their own PR, and so Rogers & Cowan was just it. And MGM advertised more stars than there are in the heavens. If you have somewhere here, we have that photo with all the great stars, most of whom I handled actually, and I look at it and I think, Rogers & Cowan was twice as big as they were, 5 times as big as they were. We handled everybody. So at that time, we were involved with the Mort Sauls and the who is it that I'm most focused on? But Bob Newhart really started it, and he was only for a moment handled there. But these were people who I worked with Milton Berle. I don't think Milton did albums though.
Right. Yeah. No, I don't.
That's really an amazing thing.
Which is interesting.
Well, Milton was. It was a shame, but I can understand why he wouldn't, because he related so strongly to the audience, to an audience of one. He related, and when I was bringing my wife, I married my wife in Europe in '57, and brought her to the United States. She was German. So we're coming across the United States. We had like $140 to get us across the United States, which at that time was money.
Sure.
And so we get to Vegas, and we still have $5 or $10 left. So at that time, you could go to a really good show for a $4.58 fruit compote. Right. You can go in and see these great shows. So I said, here's Milton Berle. I thought, I'm going to introduce you to America. He was America. He was the comedy voice of America. So we go in, and he had this very famous act on his television show. One of his shticks was he had the Metropolitan Quartet, these four great voices, and then he would come in and mess up their act. And so I said to my wife, this is American culture. You're going to be introduced to it. And so out come these four opera people. They're singing. She's happy. This is American culture. It's her culture. Suddenly out comes Milton with his shoes slipping off his feet and the goofball thing. And he starts screwing up the act. And everybody's laughing. And at a certain point, she stands up and she says, "Will someone please get that man off the stage?" And I'm as startled as anyone. And Milton turns to her. He says, "What's the matter, lady? You got a problem?" And she said, "Yes, you're disgusting." And he plays it, and he does this big leer, and he says, "Why, did you hear something good?" She said, "Yes, until you got here." And then she sits down angry. And there's a big applause, and then she goes on, and then she reaches over and she says, "We have to get out of here." I said, "Why?" She says, "I didn't know he was a clown." I said, "It's okay, darling. They liked it." She says, "We have to leave." And so I said, "Okay." So she stands up. The audience starts to applaud. They think she's back in the show. So she sits there, and at the end of it, she says, "Let's just stay here. I don't want to see anyone." And people were coming by saying, "Hey, sister, you were terrific." But that was Milton. He was of the moment. And I guess that's why he didn't do it, because every performance was different.
Right, yeah.
And years later, then we handled him, and we went to Vegas with him. And so one time I said, I just wonder if you remember the time my wife almost broke up your act. And he says, "No." I said, "How can you not remember it? You were sensational." He said, "I'm always sensational." He didn't have it. He says, "I'm always wisecrafting." But the Stan Frebergs, all these people picked it up. Mort Saul didn't like Rogers and Cowan. I don't know why, but he liked me. And Mort was, I thought, a very special guy because he dealt in his own human frailty.
Yeah.
And I still remember one of his lines was, "I hate movies." He says, "Every time there's a crucial moment, they fade out." He says, "I don't have any fade outs in my life. I have to live every fucking minute." Oh, wait, can I say that?
Absolutely.
Okay. And it was a great philosophy. It was telling us it's true of all of our lives. We have to live every minute. But it was a wonderful thing because Rogers and Warren Cowan he was such a magically successful guy that people came there. They felt very insecure, having suddenly secured their own freedom. They didn't know what to do with it. And I remember we would go to the most arduous thing about that decade for me was when you had to hear their album while they're watching you. It was a challenge to your very existence because you were under forensic investigation the whole time. So one time Warren was Warren and I went over to Stan Freberg. Stan was introducing an album called Stan Freberg Modestly Presents the History of the United States. And in it, he introduced stereophonic sound to these albums. The others, they didn't need it. What was the stereo? You hear the audience. And but here he was acting things out. And so one character's voice may emanate from the right or the left. And when we were listening to it, he'd come over to the right and he'd be mouthing the words, and then he'd go to the left. Well, Warren had a really bad habit. He would fall asleep in the middle of anything. Oh, no. So we had this incredible plan that I would sit next to him, and when I saw him start to fall, because a comedian does not like to see a closed eyes, and he really doesn't like to see two closed eyes. And so when Warren would fall asleep, and Stan wasn't looking at him, or whoever it was, I let it go, and then when the person turned to him, I would nudge Warren, and he'd wake up with a burst of laughter. And so there was one point where there wasn't anything particularly immediately funny happening, but I was leaning on a book, and it slipped, and I bumped into Warren's arm, and he woke up with this burst of laughter, which had nothing to do with anything on the record. And Stan was really perplexed by that, and then he thought, well, this man is seeing something so intrinsically funny that he's finding laughter there, and he gave a small applause to Warren for it.
Oh my God! Yeah, I mean that's the inherent sort of.
Okay, Beverly Hills is not burning down; it's just a fire engine.
That is kind of like this sort of. With the insecurity of any comedian comes also the desire that maybe somebody else will see the genius even you don't see in your own work, which I think
well, reliably they were geniuses.
Sure, absolutely.
Stan actually played one of my greatest moments for me. Mm-hmm. I was handling Bonnie and Clyde. I handled a lot of Warren Beatty's films, and so. It was Oscar time, and the only person who hated Bonnie and Clyde was the New York Times reviewer, Bosley Crowther, the most important reviewer in the United States. Hated it. He found 7 occasions to give it a bad review. Wow. He discovered it at the Toronto Film Festival, hated it, it'll go nowhere. And the successor piled on success, and he kept at it. And so the time was the awards time, Academy Awards, and at that time the Publicists Guild has an award ceremony too, and they honor the journalist of the year. And so I go over to Warren and I said, "Look, Warren, the journalist they're honoring this year is Bosley Crowther. He's leaving the New York Times, and they're giving him this culminating award." And Warren said, "They'll never go for it." He was way ahead of me. And I said, "I think they will." And I was suggesting that he would present the award to him. So I go, they go crazy over it. And I said, well, there's no fun if he's on the stage. They'll know what it is. Mm-hmm. And so Stan Freberg was the MC, and he starts into discussing that we're presenting the award to Bosley Crowther. To present this, we have a young man, and he starts going into this rather towering biography of what Warren had accomplished, but not really indicating who it was. And the people in the audience, all of the top media in the town come to that event. Yeah. And everybody sort of, what the hell is this? Who is it up there? And I had Warren in the back, not in the auditorium, but in the hallway outside. At a certain point, I said, let's go. And so Warren starts down the right aisle that leads down to the stage. And as he starts down, some of the people in the back turn over. Here's this tall guy. Who is it? Oh, my God, it's Warren. And it started. It was... The whole room was just sort of roaring with anticipation or surprise. And they got to the point, and Warren gets up, and it just so happened that Leslie Caron was sitting there, with whom he had been romantic, and so he stopped to give her a kiss. Oh, big deal for the audience. And he went over, and Bosley Crowther is terrified. He thinks that he's been invited to his own hanging. And so Warren gets up, and I could hear he was nervous because the response was so big. You could almost hear his knees knocking. And so he starts into this really beautiful appreciation of what Bosley Crowther had truly meant. And, forgetting and Bosley Crowther's attack on Bonnie and Clyde was one of our chief assets because it kept showing that he was a jerk, and that really emphasized how much everybody else loved it. So it was, but Stan played it. I had not talked to him about what he was going to say, and he brought it. He just built it, and it was incredible.
It's so funny. I love hearing stories of just beautifully improvised moments like that.
It was the best moment of showmanship I ever created.
Yeah.
In fact, the next day, the LA Times headline was Warren Beatty showmanship brings house down. It was really good. But listening to their albums for the first time with watching, I took my wife up with me too. Shelley Berman was playing the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco. This hall must have been in the late 60s. And another of my clients was Van Johnson, a star that people today, the people who love vinyl probably know and love Van Johnson. He was a great star of the 40s, 50s, 60s, and well into the end of his life. And he was a very, very sweet person. He was the person that you saw. And so we're up there, and I stopped by at Shelley's apartment at the Fairmont with my wife to introduce and say, look, we're looking forward to see the show. He says, well, I have really the front table for you for both shows. I said, well, Shelley, we're going to be at the midnight show. I have Van Johnson. He's doing Bye Bye Birdie at the St. Francis. And so I'll be there first. He says, oh, my God, Van Johnson, the Red Sox, the last time I saw Paris, he is one of the greatest actors. I adore him. He's one of my idols. He says, you don't think, no, I'm sure it's not possible, but maybe, and what do you think? I said, would he come? I said, he's very tired after show, but I'll ask him. I can ask him. And so he said, oh, I know it won't happen, but just in case. So I go over to see Van, and I see, and after the show, I go up to him with this thing, and he says, "Oh, Kitty, I'm so tired." And I said, "Van, I understand that, but Shelley Berman, I think he's a god to him. Sure. The Red Sox, the last time I saw Paris," and he says, "Oh well, okay, I'll try to do it." So I let Shelley know he's coming. We have table for three underneath. He always sat on a stool. Right. Underneath his stool. Midnight comes. Shelley's in the wings. We see him in the wings. There is no Van Johnson. He's not going out without Van Johnson. Finally, at 7 after, he's pushed out onto the stage. He's there. He's looking at our table. He's very distracted by this, but he's a great performer. Sure. And he starts into his routine. And it's quarter after Van comes in. So Van sits down there. Now Shelley's floating. He's performing before his God. Everything's great. And so they come over, complimentary champagne. Mr. Johnson takes a sip. He says, "Oh, I'm afraid that's flat." And the waiter is so upset, and then it goes off, and Shelley's upset. His God is there, and he's been shat upon by a flat bottle of champagne. Second bottle comes, it's flat. Shelley is really getting upset now. Not as upset as my wife. Third bottle comes, pour it for Van, start to bring it to his mouth. My wife reaches over, puts her hand on the glass. She said, "Van, if this bottle's flat, I'm pouring it over your head." Oh, delicious wine.
That's amazing.
But it was a moment that was powered by the kind of neurotic intensity that these comedians had.
Sure. I mean, there's got to be this interesting combination of, there's always going to be a little bit of hand-holding, I'm sure, but also sounds like you have a ton of admiration for these people you got to work with, too. So that's kind of What's that like for you? What is it? Do you feel like you're in any way involved in their work, or do you separate yourself from that completely?
Well, I never flattered myself that I contributed to the work,
Sure.
but yeah, we did really creative things. Well, I a couple of years ago, I sat down to write a book about it, Starflacker. Mm-hmm. Not what you're hearing, Flacker. A flack is a press agent, and that was a word my daughter created for me. But I wanted to put down stories like that, mm-hmm. and I think the Stan Freberg story's in it too, mm-hmm. and because I wanted to preserve the golden age. The golden age, the vinyl was part of the golden age. Sure. And the golden age was so different from what we have now. Entertainment now is very mundane. Mm-hmm. Not that La La Land wasn't a superior film, but it didn't have the star power of American in Paris. Right. Sure. It was just Singing in the Rain. Those were great world experiences. Yeah. And I wanted to put down what it was I loved. Cary Grant was Cary Grant. When mm-hmm. you were around Cary Grant, you had the same experience that you had on the screen. You watched him in Bringing a Baby or whatever it was. He was an extraordinary guy. And so I just started writing it down. And by the time I was finished, I had 1,300 pages. Jeez. And so I knew that wasn't going to fly, so I cut it in half. Uh-huh. And so the book was 680 pages. Mm-hmm. And then I discovered no publisher is going to publish 680 pages unless your name is Leo Tolstoy. And so I thought, well, I'm not cutting it down because part of what the book is about was how big it was. Sure. James Mason was an experience of a lifetime, and certainly Greer Garson and then Cary Grant, Gary Cooper, Paul Newman. These were super personalities, and I just couldn't hint at it. Mm-hmm. It's not a sip. Yeah. It's a drink, and so I had to put it out on. Self-published on Amazon, uh-huh. and lo and behold, it did really well. And particularly when there were gigantic pieces of publicity, Robert Osborne called and asked me to be a guest programmer on Turner Classic Movies, which is my favorite thing. We're either watching the cable news or we're watching mm-hmm. Turner Classic Movies, and that next day, the day before, my book had been number 958,000th back, was like a million back. But there are millions of books on the internet, on Amazon. And the next day at noon, it was number 700.
All right. Wow.
It leapfrogged a million books in 12 hours. Which is the power of publicity. Yeah. But I saw through having relived that experience mm-hmm. what it meant to me. Yeah. The golden age, in those days, and this applies to the comedic stars and the albums. Bob Newhart created a new kind of way of looking at life. Yeah. He had this piquant. He looked at it from like 8 degrees off. Yes. Yeah. And it let you see the world differently. And that's what the movies did. And the comedians, and they created how we wanted to live our own lives. Cary Grant, we all aspired to the charm that he had. Sure. And it was real. It was he wasn't born to it. He had a very tragic childhood, mm-hmm. and he created this effervescent charm, and we all aspired to that. So it added, for those few moments of our life that we were at Cary Grant, we felt good. Sure. Gary Cooper was the guy that was so straightforward and honest that you knew his word was gold, mm-hmm. and he taught us things about what we should aspire to as being decent, dependable people. And each one of them. My very favorite was Greer Garson because she had class beyond actually one of the greatest moments of my life. My mother never understood what I did because I didn't know what publicity was. I'd never heard of publicity until I got an office boy job at a company called Rogers and Cowan, and then I realized it was everything I'd ever prepared to be.
Really?
But so I got to work with those great stars, and that was in the 50s. And so Greer Garson, for those of you too young to remember, was one of the great actresses of the 40s. She was the Meryl Streep of that time, but she had a kind of a grace that was actually greater than Meryl Streep's. Yeah. And my mother's favorite film of all time was a movie called Mrs. Miniver, which just presented a woman in the full blossom of grace. And that was she was her greatest star. So one time I'm driving my mom someplace, and I had to stop at Greer's to drop something off. So I go to the door, and oh, dear boy, so wonderful you're here, come on in. And I said, well, Greer, my mom's in the car. And so my mother's sitting in the car, and there's a tap at the window, and suddenly there's Mrs. Miniver inviting her in for tea.
Oh, my God.
And so it was the moment my mom knew what I did for a living.
That's amazing. That's the dream right there, because your parents will never quite understand.
Well, it made up for all the awful things I did when I was a kid.
Of course. I love the idea that there's another whole book of stuff, though, and I like that you.
Is there? I'm not sure I'm going to do that. The next book.
But at least you've got it.
I've got it. The next book. It's not so long. I think it's like 500, but I think I've told enough stories, and so the next book is called Win-Win: The Hollywood Rules of Persuasion.
All right.
Because we're personages are very persuasive people.
Sure.
Everybody has to be. It's like having to urinate. We all have to. We all have to persuade, and why not be the best at it that you can? Well, Hollywood press agents are great at it. I mean, I know how to, pick somebody's pocket of their mind and have them go away very happy.
Yeah.
And the whole point of Hollywood Rules of Persuasion is that the main objective is to gratify that person in a way that's substantial, that you don't change their mind, you change their mind for their better. And so I think that's what the next book will be.
Wow, that sounds complex.
But I do take from it, my last chapter in it is a chapter from the second book.
Okay.
It's my first day in publicity was one of the best days of my life.
Yeah, that's amazing. So we were talking before we got started a little bit about the Milestone Comedy album, which is probably the first family.
Yeah.
I love that album.
Yeah, Vaughn Mader, I think, created the awareness. I think what he created was the awareness that what is the great thing? Why do we buy? I mean, I handle Barbra Streisand. You buy her album because she's brilliant. You buy it because you're going to want to hear it 100 times.
Of course.
And people weren't really buying comedy because they didn't know that they would want to hear it 100 times. Sure. And why not? We saw Sunday night. We saw Casablanca for I'm sure the 58th time in our lives, and it was still great. And Vaughn put out this album, and we were all caught up with the Kennedy clan, that we had royalty for the first time in our lives, and that he made fun of them, and we could still adulate them, but laugh at them. And we listened to it time after time.
Sure.
And then suddenly there was Bob Newhart, and you could hear each time you heard it, there was a different nuance that you got out of it. Bill Cosby had the same thing. I have to say, Bill Cosby's Fall from Grace really shook me because certainly at that time, and I had Helen Reddy performing with him in Tahoe, and so there was a private plane that took Helen up. Helen was one of the meaningful singers of the 50s and 60s, absolutely. 70s actually, and so she and Cosby were playing Harrah's in Tahoe together, and so the plane was taking her up there, picking him up in Vegas, taking him, and he was talking on the plane. He says, I really hate. I love the performing, but I hate the fact that these people are going to be paying $35 for that evening. Well, in '72, $35 was a lot of money, And we pay $1,000 to see Hamilton, but he said, you know what, $35,000 just to that guy. He says, that's 2 new pair of shoes. It's taking his family out for dinner, and he says, what am I going to do that's going to give him $35 for? And so from that, I was very taken by the guy.
Sure.
And I also handled his. He did a remake of the Groucho Marx show "You Bet Your Life,"
Yes, right.
and so I handled that. And I was really proud to be around him. And then when this came up, but I'd seen signs of it. I never saw a sign with Harvey Weinstein. I never saw that. I mean, he was brutally determined to get his way, and working for him was a great education because he always had good ideas.
Sure.
And you were always at the top of your farm.
Yeah.
But that was disappointing.
I can imagine. Yeah, for sure. Do you have, if we go back to the beginning of the what's your first experience? Was your experience with comedy albums the same as everybody else's was? You were buying them commercially, or was it you got to see a lot of them before anybody ever got to hear them? I'm curious about that.
Well, see, when Vaughn did that was, what was that, like 62, 3?
It was right before Kennedy was assassinated.
Yeah,
so,
okay, that's 63.
He 2 albums before he was assassinated.
Yeah. So it was like 62, 63. So I was like 30 then. And, we used to go and see, we used to go to the comedy club, and we really enjoyed that. I don't think I was so much into albums then, because an album then costs like $8, and that was a lot of money for us.
Yeah. What do you think that equates to right now?
Of the what?
$8 in 1960 something money. What do you think?
How much would that be?
30?
I guess about $25.
Yeah, okay. That's steep. I mean, right now I wouldn't, and I collect them. I still wouldn't pay that much for most albums.
Well, we lost I had a great collection because Rogers and Cowan handled Frank Sinatra and all of the. So we had a lot of albums that we got of the great performers of the time, and we burned down in '93. So, but you learn to live without.
For sure. Are there some other, specifically, so you write, there's a whole chapter about the albums in your book. Is there some stuff stand out that maybe some of my younger listeners might not even know about? I mean, we talk about a little bit of everything with people, and you'd be surprised who knows about what, but I'm wondering if there are any albums that stand out to you or artists that stand out to you that maybe...
I'm trying to think which is the one. There were the comedians there. Television was very rich, and at exactly the right time. So the Dick Shawns and the Orson Beans and the Gary Moores and there were George Gobel. They all came up at that time, and strangely enough, I think the 2 greatest of those comedians were Harvey Korman and Carol Burnett's other guy.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. Tim Conway?
Tim Conway. I think Tim Conway and Santa Barbara. Everybody thinks he's the greatest comedian of all time. He was. I'm losing it. Do I have it here? Jonathan Winters.
Oh, sure.
They were probably the 2 most inspired comedians of the time. Harvey more is a visual comedian.
Yes, right.
I can see why he didn't have that. But it was great. And then I was able to, in handling people like Cloris Leachman, I was very much a part of the Mel Brooks group.
Really? Oh,
yeah.
And
then Carl Reiner became one of the really significant people in my life. And I think in many ways, Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner gave birth to the comedy on vinyl.
For sure, absolutely.
Yeah, I think they preceded Von Meter.
Mm-hmm. And I still love, most of those still hold up. So, I mean, they're two, like, if you're to nail down who my two biggest heroes are, it's probably the two of them.
Yeah.
And not just because I discovered a lot of their stuff in reverse, because when I was a kid, their albums were not accessible to me. But then eventually I find all the 2,000-year-old man, and just, God, they're just so brilliant.
Great. Well, I mean, my life is full of so many treasures because I got to meet these people. Sure. And what the book is about is the kind of human ways that I saw them that nobody else. And there was a really good journalist on Variety, a guy named Dale Olson, and I always said to him, "Come on over to publicity. You're going to get you'll like it. You'll be very good at it." He was very into stars. And he said, well, why would I want to do that? All my life I wanted to be a reporter for Variety, and now I'm doing what I want to do. I said, well, you'll make more money. Mm-hmm. And he says, I don't care about that. Give me another reason. I said, well, as a journalist, you learn these people from the outside in. As a press agent, I learn them from the inside out.
Sure.
And he came over.
Wow.
and had a really great life, and he enjoyed the. I mean, I've never taken a photo with a client. Mm-hmm. Probably that's not true, but I made a point of not taking photos with clients because I thought it broke down the certain objectivity that I had to have.
I get that. Yeah.
But what happened was with Carl, I really got to know Carl through my writing. I've done a number of films and television. I've wrote television movies and movies, and so one of them that sold 100 times was called Lost in August, and it went through Eli Landau, who did The Iceman Cometh and Hedda and all these really distinguished films. Loved that script, and so he was going to do it. We went through a bunch of directors. Suddenly Carl is on the script with me. I was so excited because I'm going to get to work on a script with Carl. And I'm going to hear all these funny things that he's going to bring to it. And he didn't really. And so I saw he was always making notes, and he would write TTA, or he'd write OTN. TTTA or OTN. So finally I said, what is that? Well, you're making me crazy with that. He says, OTN is on the nose. Okay. The audience could have written that line and probably already wrote it before you put it on them. Okay. And I said, what's TTTN? He says, you're talking to the audience. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, your characters have to talk to each other. Yeah. Now, the main thing that you do in evolving narrative is you have to give story background. You have to give information to the audience. And so you have to have very clever dialogue in which you can do it. But if you ever have a character say, we agreed that if I did that, you would do this. He said, nobody ever says that. You're telling the audience what something, and they know it's a cheesy way out that you just took. Yeah. And it was great. And just being around Carl, he was just so kind. And his wife was one of the greatest boîte singers I've ever heard, really? Nightclub singers. She was a chanteuse. Mm-hmm. She was 8 years older than he. Uh-huh. So when I got to know her, she was already well in her 70s. At a certain point, during one of the recessions when my company could have used another client, he called and he says, I want you to do something on Estelle for me. And I come over there and he says, she has a new album and I want to do the publicity because she's 92 in an album. And he played the album for me. It was very nice. It didn't have the perfection she had before. Sure. And so I said, Carl, I'm not going to do this. He said, why? I said, well, the people will think this was as good as she could sing. She was brilliant. Sure, you don't do that to her. And he was really hurt. And so he said, well, how are you on to anything new in your life? I said, well, I'm teaching myself piano. So he says, well, play for me. I said, well, I can't play for you. I can't play in front of somebody. He said, no, play for me. So I sit down and very haltingly do something. And he says, I like it. I says, it's very, very restful. I said, you're kidding. He says, yes, I can take little naps while you're looking for the next chord. But that was his humor. It was always humane.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that so much.
So, and I think that's why I really think they gave comedy albums a rocket ride.
For sure.
The 2,000-year-old man.
And so many to follow too. They did so many wonderful albums after that. And what's interesting is there weren't that many other people doing, at least at the time, doing it much. Actually, you might know better than I would. Mm-hmm. They're obviously a little rehearsed, but what level of improv are we listening to in the albums? Do you know? Like, some of them seem a little rehearsed, like they definitely got a bit that they're going to do, but the rest of it seems like they're just going for it.
I would think that it would be 80-20.
Yeah.
I think 80% was written, and then if a moment came up, then they knew what to do with it.
Mm-hmm. Did they discover it in improv though? Do you know, in terms of like?
I was never party to their working habits, but I handled Peter Ustinov. I don't know if Peter did albums. Did he?
He did a few. Yeah,
he did?
And they're wonderful.
Funny enough, I did. I'm not familiar with them, but weird. Peter. I learned something from Peter. I learned something from every client. The book is a really good learning experience because you get to learn all the things that I got to learn.
Course, yeah.
And so one time Peter was, he had a new book out, and I had 7 interviews in a row. And so at a certain point, he did the first one. I said, I'm sorry I'm doing this to you and doing 7 interviews in a row. He says, no. He says, I love interviews. Really? Why? He said, I learn what I think. And he was right. He said, when people ask you a question that you've never addressed, you have to come to a conclusion. Mm-hmm. And I thought, boy, I used it all my life because when I had clients who didn't know how to do interviews, I told them that, sure. And then they reacted with interest. So, but the interesting thing was that we did the 7 interviews. He gave the same interview 7 times.
Of course.
He didn't do what he told me he was going to do, but I think he had picked up that it worked the first time, and so he'd say something like, "I once said, and I must agree with myself." Well, that was in every interview, sure. But why not? He's entitled to it. It's intellectual property.
Well, of course, and his albums actually kind of have. He does have an album that was at the BBC. That's a series of interviews where they ask him to tell a story, but the stories are just voice, mm-hmm. back and forth, and they're brilliant. And I don't know how improvised they are or not, but it doesn't matter. They're just so wonderful to listen to. Very dynamic albums.
Well, I saw a scene that he improvised in Spartacus. Remember Spartacus? Yeah. So there's a scene. He runs a school for training facility for gladiators, mm-hmm. and Laurence Olivier is a big political figure in the Roman Empire, and he comes and he's purchasing gladiators. And there's a scene at the end with whatever they were talking about, and Olivier, they're trying to steal the scene from each other. And so Peter gives a line, and Olivier gives his line, but he gives it inflections that are somewhat drawn out, and then Peter is responding with a reflection that is drawn out. And Stanley Kubrick is watching this, and he knows this isn't what the scene he's going to use. So he lets it go on. And then he says, "Okay, guys, we've had our fun. Let's do the scene."
I love that so much. That's just like you can tell in listening to these. He's very facetious. That he clearly he liked his people. I love that so much.
And they knew that it wasn't the scene. Once they got it, it was a game they were playing. But Peter was very competitive, and we had games that we'd play going to interviews. You're driving with Alan Arkin to an interview. Mm-hmm. You have to talk about something on the way there. And Alan, the only fun with Alan was trying to make him laugh, because he's very dour. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's his comic persona.
Sure.
And so one time we're driving someplace, and he said, and I said to him, "Did you ever have another press agent?" He said, "Yes, I had so-and-so." I said, "Well, he's pretty good. Why did you let him go?" He says, "He never shut up." You'd say, he'd just talk and it'd go on and on and on. You know what I mean? I said, "I have nothing to say on the subject." There was no response. And about a block later, he went,
I love it. That's so good. Oh, that's the kind of reaction you want. Did you have any were there other albums that you were, when you started actually getting into albums and being interested in them, what's the kind of stuff that you were buying?
We were, you were introduced to the album, but there were so many places that these people could do, that you encountered these people on TV, sure. the Maury Amsterdams, yes. And they were constantly on, and you had a chance to develop a taste for them. Mm-hmm. And so, but the ones, it was Dick Gregory and Godfrey Cambridge. Uh-huh. Godfrey Cambridge really took us because it was that was the early 60s, mm-hmm. and mid-60s maybe, when civil rights was really coming into view, and we were starting to, for the first time, really acknowledge how we had enabled the oppression of people. And so Godfrey Cambridge, who was very angry, would strike us as somebody that we were sort of obliged. His humor was great, but you felt obliged to laugh with him of these things, because that's a way of asserting civil rights. Yeah. And I remember one time we were in Vegas with somebody else, and we bumped into Godfrey Cambridge, and we were telling how much it meant to us. And I saw how he resented. He thought we were pretending to be liberals.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, he was looking for that because, how could we feel that because our skin was white?
Sure. I mean, I guess if that is absolutely your worldview and your point of view is absolutely to change.
But that anger was part of his comedy.
Sure. Yeah. It's interesting it was genuinely deep rooted in who he was.
And we would go to it was a great time for the comedy clubs, and a lot of those people came out of it. Mm-hmm. They would get albums because of and we really liked, what's his name? Dice Clay.
Oh yeah.
Dice Clay.
Yeah.
And you went there for the routines, but you really went there for the ad libs, mm-hmm. and the heckles. And I remember one time we were at some club, and he was very abrasive, and so he could make people angry. And so some guy really had some angry heckle, and he says, "What are you doing after the show?" He says, "I'm fucking your brother." And he says, "Oh my God, I just heckled myself."
That's amazing. Were you present for the recording of any albums? Do you know of?
No, actually, I don't think it was ever asked to be, because mm-hmm. it wasn't a good thing. When you're doing a club act, then the audience response is very important.
Sure.
I mean, even today, I can't stand a laugh track. A laugh track just seems so phony to me.
Hard, yeah.
But and even the ones, because I've covered the taping of probably 500 television comedy half hours. We handled Roseanne and Happy Days, and mm-hmm. we handled a great many of those shows. And although with Roseanne, it was interesting because Carsey Werner thought we could add a lot to it. It was a very distinguished show, but it was, people were not, they accepted there was popularity, but they didn't really understand. It was really helping redefine television.
Absolutely.
I mean, they took TV and comedy into areas that were even All in the Family wasn't doing.
For sure, yeah.
But they never told her that I was on the show, because they knew they should get me fired. And I handled the show, I think, 3 or 4 years. Mm-hmm. And finally, there was one show where Howard Hessman and Fred Willard were getting married. It was the first mm-hmm. gay marriage on a television show. And so I had a lot of media there. And so after after the taping, or maybe after rehearsal, I had Entertainment Tonight there to do an interview with the two guys, and so I took them out I saw some trailer was sort of far away. We went over by that, and so we were doing the interview, and suddenly Roseanne comes out of the trailer. They just moved her trailer, and I knew this was trouble. And she says, "What the hell is going on here?" and all that. And I answered, and she says, "And who the hell are you anyway?" I was gone the next day.
Oh, no. Oh,
They were right. The second she knew I was on, it was gone.
I guess that makes sense that you wouldn't be there for any comedy album. They want like a genuine laugh. They want to make sure there's nobody invested in the success of it in the room, right?
Well, it's dangerous to have people who are paid to be appreciators. It's a different kind of a laugh.
Yeah, I've been a paid laugher on sitcoms before, and it's a weird experience. It's a very
Well,
weird
I was a laugher when I was a kid.
Uh-huh.
When we first came to Hollywood, I was 45.
Uh-huh.
I wanted to be in show business. I didn't have any skills. I knew I was going to be a writer, but I went up. In those days, it was the great comedians were on radio, and America's common denominator entertainment was radio, and they were all done within like 2 blocks of each other. CBS was on Sunset and Gower, NBC was on Sunset and Vine, ABC was down a couple of blocks, and so I would go up there and wanting to go into the shows. You couldn't because you had to be 14.
Oh, okay.
I was 11. I was really little. And I see this kid, and he's in line. I went over. I said, "You're no more 11 than I am." He said, "No." I said, "How are you going in?" He says, "Well, these shows are all produced by the ad agencies. They didn't buy ads. They produced the shows." And then he said, if you go over to the Taft building where most of the ad agencies were, you can get tickets that say agency on the back, and you can go in to see it. If the agency ticket, if you're wearing diapers, you can go. And so I went over there, and then I'd cultivate. There were all these 22-year-old young women at the desk and everything. I knew how to charm them. I couldn't talk to a 12-year-old girl, but I knew how to charm anybody who was older. And I got all these tickets. Yeah. And so I would go. And so one time, one of the girls said, "Do you do things can you do something on Saturday morning early?" I said, "Sure." She said, "Well, Billy Burke has her show, her Saturday show. It's taped at 8 o'clock here, so it's heard in the East Coast at 11 o'clock, and then it's rebroadcast here at 11 o'clock. And I said, "Oh, no, I'd like to do it." So it wasn't a room much bigger than a classroom, a little classroom. And they had like 20 chairs, card table chairs. And she would come out, and they have this little stage, and the microphones were there. And so I started going there because not only did you get to hear it, but it was very personal, and she would give coffee and cookies afterwards, or for me, chocolate. And I was there every Saturday. Wow. And so my mother said, "Where are you going every Saturday?" I said, "Well, I go up to see the taping of the show because my friend Billy Burke has a show and she needs people at the audience." And she says, "Billy Burke is very famous. She was married to Flo Ziegfeld. She was a very big star, and you don't know her." And I said, "Mom, I do. She's my friend." She said, "Why would she be your friend?" I said, "They like my laugh. I cultivated a laugh." That's her record. And so she said, "No, you're not telling the truth." And I said, so I get my dad to drive us both up at 7:30 on the Saturday, and we're there, and we're sitting there at the back. And then Billy Burke comes out, and then she nods to the audience, and then she nods to me and waves. And my mother looks behind to see who she's waving at. There's nobody behind us. So then she finally got it.
That's so good.
But they told me we like your laugh.
That's so great. I love it. What year was her show on? What years?
Well, I think I only did that the year of 1945, summer of 45.
Okay. There got to be recordings of that. right? They got to be recording somewhere of that.
Of those shows?
Yeah, now I want to hear. Now I've got to see if I can peg and see which ones.
Well, they were sweet, but I would go to Armis Brooks and Ozzie and Harriet and all those things. And then I'd run up on the stage for Lux Radio Theater. I'd run up on the stage afterwards. Miss Rogers, may I have your script? Mr. Milan, may I have your script?
I love it.
And I always did it to the only one who wasn't happy about it, I thought that he really liked me, was Lionel Barrymore. Mm-hmm. He had a show called Mayor of the Town. And every show I'd run up there and ask for his script. And he would just give it to me sort of gruffly. And then one time he turned to me and looked at me and he said, "Oh, it's you again." Well, that was a treasure.
Of course. Do you still have those?
Yeah, I had all those scripts, and when I went to Europe, I had some of the earliest television scripts. Mm-hmm. And when I went to Europe, I had them all put in the garage. My mom gave them away for a paper drive.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
You know, they would have destroyed somewhere else.
Sure. I know that we're a little off topic off of comedy albums, but I'm definitely curious. What's the first show you worked on? What's the first TV show you worked on at all?
That I worked on at all?
If you can remember it. I mean, because it sounds like you've done so much.
Well, the first one that I was sort of the unit person on was Jane Wyman Theater, and which was really awesome. It was shortly after she did Johnny Belinda, and she was, but she was very powerful. One time there was some noise on the set, some voice, and she didn't do anything. But at the end of the take, she said, "I just want your attention, and one thing, I would like the only voice that are heard on the sets in a shoot in a take would be those of the actors in front of the camera." Mm-hmm. And boy, there was silence after that. But I handled all the Dick Powell started anthology television with a Four-Star Theater. Mm-hmm. And so I got to work on that. He was actually the nicest man ever. Really? He was just a decent guy and a lovely man. And but you're working with Dick Powell, Charles Boyer, David Niven, Ida Lupino. Barbara Stanwyck was on a lot of our Zane Grey Theater half-hour westerns. Mm-hmm. It was great.
Oh, see, this just makes me think of, comparatively it's nothing, but when I first moved out here just doing extra work, that was my favorite thing, even if it was on a bad show. I just loved being on those old sets.
Well, I would do that too, except we weren't extras. I was a waiver. Uh-huh. A waiver got $5 a day on lunch. Okay. But we went on Julius Caesar. Mm-hmm. Those days I had hair and it was curly. Mm-hmm. So they pulled me out of the line where we were standing to get our costumes. And it was the Ides of March scene. Mm-hmm. And they needed a curly head, so they put curls on in front of me. And I was standing right next to the soothsayer. Uh-huh. And suddenly there's Marlon Brando and James Mason. It was just astonishing. And they all became my friends later because I handled James Mason. I worked with Gielgud. I worked with Eddie O'Brien, became a close friend.
Mm-hmm. What time did you work with Gielgud?
It was really strange. When I first went into my own business, I left Rogers and Cowan and told Warren Cowan I was leaving. And he says, "Who are you planning to talk to take?" And I said, "Well, I was going to tell my, Tandy Bergen and Peter Ustinov that I'm leaving." And he says, "I think it would be very rude for you to leave with some of our clients." And I agreed with him, actually. And so I didn't have anything when we started. And a friend of mine, Leslie Stevens, one of the great writers for television, back to Playhouse 90, had a new show at Warner Brothers. It was starred Hugh O'Brien, and it starred John Gielgud. Mm-hmm. And so I got to work with John Gielgud on that.
Great. That's so much fun. He actually appears. I was surprised because again, I tried at the beginning of this year to listen to a comedy album a day. Mm-hmm. That didn't work out because it's more work than you'd think. But John Gielgud appears on at least one comedy album. Really? Yes, from years ago. But it was a series of comedic scenes from plays that were from the 18th century, so they were very dry and very boring. Yeah. But immediately, even though I know, because I grew up with John Gielgud and Arthur, I immediately still could spot his voice as a young man.
Yeah.
It's still like the greatest thing to listen to.
Beautiful. But,
Yeah.
well, I think James Mason was the most interesting voice for me.
Yeah,
And it wasn't classic because it was very high.
Mm-hmm.
And whereas Burton, I work with Richard Burton.
Mm-hmm.
I work with all the. I think actually the most beautiful voice. One of my closest friends was Lawrence Harvey, and he did an album. This was vinyl, but it wasn't comedy.
Sure.
It's called "This Is My Beloved," and not Hubert Law's great jazz pianist. The music is just terrible that I can't think of his name. But it's Larry reading this poem. This is my beloved. Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, if you ever want a girl to fall in love with you,
Yeah.
you play this album for her.
I feel like I've seen it. I feel like in hunting for old albums, I might have seen it. Now I'm going to seek it
Well,
out
if you ever
quickly.
can buy it,
Yeah.
I would buy it. But Larry was really dear. But he invited me to a recording he was doing. One Saturday, he said, "What are you doing?" Called up, "I'm washing my dad's car. Be in front of your house. I'm picking you up in 20 minutes. You're coming with me." Well, I have a busy day. He said, "No, you're coming with me." So we drive up to the old CBS, where Billy Burke was, the CBS radio studios on Sunset and Gower. And I walk in, and there's this little man with a mustache, and Larry is doing an oratorio of some musical performance, and he brings me over, and he says, he introduced me to Stravinsky.
What? Wow. Wow.
He introduced me to
Out of
Stravinsky.
nowhere, it doesn't prepare you for it.
No, he was recording Stravinsky's Noah and the Flood.
Wow.
He and Sebastian Cabot.
Really?
And
That's amazing.
and it was really great. And then I learned a lesson from Stravinsky. I'm always looking for what lesson I'm going to learn.
Sure.
And so Larry, afterwards, he says, "Mr. Harvey, that was very good." And Larry says, "Maestro, I can do better." And he says, "Mr. Harvey, good enough is good enough." It's a very important lesson to learn.
It is. Perfection is impossible, I think. You can find perfection in something you admire, but
Yeah.
shooting for perfection yourself, it's a mixed bag.
Yeah. Well, I find that you very often overdo it. I'm redoing the second book now because I find that there are some places where I just kept it in because I like the writing,
Okay, yeah.
and it's very seductive, but it's really counterproductive.
For sure. So normally towards the end of an episode, I always ask, well, why would you recommend this album? Well, we talked about a bunch of different things. Is there one particular album you think people should seek out if they're not familiar with some of the original classics of this golden age?
I think because basically Stan Freberg didn't do stand-up; he did narrative comedy. And I think Stan Freberg modestly presents the history of the United States.
Yeah.
I would go for that.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. We've talked about it on the show before. Those are some pretty good episodes. So definitely worth listening
But just
to.
he evoked like it was the what do you call it? The pipe and the drum. What is that called? It's the what?
You're asking the wrong person.
Okay, so he's with that painting of the
Oh,
guy
yes,
with
yes, of course. Washington Crest and the Devil. No, not that one. I'm an idiot. I
Okay,
know which one you're
no,
talking
but
about. The fighting drum one, yes.
and so they have that going, and the guy says, one of the guys has a bandage over his eye, and the other guy says, "Watch where you're going." He says, "The bandage is slipping on my eye."
You know, actually, it's interesting you mentioned that one because we talked about that a bit, and we talked about First Family. There's only one guy left who's on both of those, and that's Chuck McCann, who's a guy I desperately want to get on this podcast at some point. So Chuck McCann, if you're out there, please come on. You're on two of the best comedy albums of all time. Even though he's doing like side voices and stuff, Chuck McCann is like, he's kind of the ultimate guy.
Okay, I'm gonna have to tell me what the albums are.
Yeah, he's on First Family and on the.
Oh, he was on those.
He's on both of
Oh,
them.
you're kidding.
He's the only person left alive from both of them.
Wow.
Yeah, because June Foray passed away just a few months ago, so she was the other person who was left. And yeah,
Well, I'm losing a lot of my people now. I had not consecutive, but in 3 weekends, I had to do Marty Landau's not top. What do you call it?
eulogy.
Obituary.
Sure.
Words that exact pain for me. I can never remember.
For sure.
And then 2 weeks later, I spent the Sunday writing Joe Bologna's.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But I'm going to put you with Renee Taylor, because I don't think they did any albums, though.
No, but Renee Taylor's voice is on one of my favorites of all time because she's in the producers. Her voice is in one of the songs. She's in it, so just short period, but distinct voice, obviously.
Well, I got to do a lot with Mel because of Chloris, and so one time they were shooting. Actually, strangely, my favorite Mel Brooks film. No, my favorite Mel Brooks film is To Be or Not to Be. But the other is because each of them had really strong narrative. The other was High Anxiety. So I went out there one time to 20th for lunch with Chloris, and so Chloris and I are having lunch, and Mel joins us at the table, and she's Frau Blucher, and oh no, in that one she was the nurse,
yes.
And so she said, "You've got to feel my tit." And I said, "What are you talking about? We're in the commissary at 20th." And she says, "No, you have to feel her tit." And Mel says, "Feel her tit, goddammit." And I did, and it was. I said, "That's steel." She says, "Yeah, I have steel tits in this film."
That's so funny. Oh my god. I love that every story about her seems to be true. Like, just the most irreverent. She's also a hero of mine. Like, just the most irreverent, brilliant, transformative comedic actress just about of all time.
Well, the first time I met her, she was naked.
Really?
No, her ex-husband hired me to do a campaign on her for the Last Picture Show.
Oh, okay.
And I thought it was a pretty good campaign because she won the Oscar for it. But but I had never met her. Although I think maybe I did because we handled Kiss Me Deadly at Rogers and Cowan. And I think I did an interview with her. She was gorgeous at that time. That was 15 years before that.
Okay.
And so I come to her house, and her daughter opens the door. I said, "I'm taking your mom to the first screening, the big screening of Last Picture Show." And so she says, "My mom's in the shower." It was the shower right by the door. And she says, "Mom," the man says, she says, "tell him to wait in the living room." I go in the living room, sitting in this sort of dark living room. Then I hear footsteps, and she pads and stark naked and goes to the piano and starts playing the piano. And so I'm looking the other way, and I go, ahem. I actually said ahem. And she said, "Oh, I didn't know you were there." "Oh, okay, I'll be right there." I said, "We're very, very late."
Oh my god, that's phenomenal.
But she was remarkable. And so I had Gene Hackman and she both won the Academy Award the same night.
Oh, okay.
So beforehand, I'd had Gene. No, her award came on fairly early. It was supporting actress, and I guess Gene presented it, and he says it's Cloris Leachman for Last Picture Show. Cloris Leachman, which was remarkable because Eileen Brennan was nominated for that, and Cloris stands up, and then she comes in, and I go backstage, and I'm taking her and Gene around after the award presentation. We go up to the media. And she said, "I'm so unhappy. I'm so unhappy." I said, "Cloris, you just won the Academy Award." "I'm happy. I had history in my hands and I lost it. Jean's looking at her. And I said, "You just won the Oscar." She said, "No, I had it all planned out. They were going to say, and the award goes to Anne Margaret for carnal knowledge." And then Anne would stand up and be bewildered, and she'd start down the aisle, and then I would throw myself around her feet screaming, "No, you can't. It's mine. It's mine."
Oh, my God.
She was right.
That's a pure comedian.
But she would have lived forever.
Right. That's amazing. Oh, that's beautiful.
And 4 months later, I asked an actor who were the 4 actors the person can tell me. It was Cloris. She didn't know.
Of course.
Nobody remembers 4 months later who won the award.
Right. Well, you remember the lady who accepted the Oscar for Marlon Brando.
I was there.
Were you?
Yeah, I had to take her off because I had Roger Moore was presenting it. Roger was a client, and so we would divide up who took. If you knew somebody, it was easier because they would follow you, And so he starts off this. If people want to go to, I have a blog on HuffPost, and this is really well written on that. I wrote it when Roger died, but he walks off, and I said, Roger, I think you should go back to your seat. There's no point in your coming up, even for the photos. This is a standalone. He says, no, you're absolutely right. I'll go back. At which point, and I start taking her to the elevator to go up to where the media lines are. And some 6'5" security guy runs over and he says, where are you taking her? And I said, well, she has to go up and go through the media. And he says, no, she has to stay here. I said, please, this is a moment that has to be handled very well. Let me take her there and subtract her from the rest of the show. Let the show go on. No, he says, all of the winners are supposed to be on stage at the end. It's a tribute to John Ford, and everybody's going to sing God Bless America. I said, did you not hear what she said up there? I said, John Ford is the greatest director, the most humane director of all time. He killed more Indians than George Custer. And please let me take her up there. And at which point, somebody knocked a flat over, and he starts to go there. And Roger gives me a quick move of the hand, and I start running to the elevator with her. And the guy comes in, he's yelling and says, wait. And so Roger got in his way, and they're doing like the samba in the middle of the stage. And Roger's keeping him while they get her up there. And he's yelling, where are you taking that Indian?
Okay, let's make sure people can find your work. So your book, your blog, whatever.
Okay, well, the book is on, it's called Starflacker Inside the Golden Age of Hollywood. You just go to Starflacker or Amazon, it'll take you there. And it was $23, which I thought was an okay price for 670 pages.
Absolutely.
But I wanted to lower it, and so I went to them and I said, I want to lower it. He said, well, it's so thick, all we can afford to lower it to is $22.03. So that's the price now, because they can't afford to make any money off it. But it's not a book that you will read over a weekend. It's you put it by your bed or you put it by the toilet. You can read it, 5 pages at a time, and it's fun.
Looking forward to it very much.
Well, it's funny. Every page is funny. But not because of me. These people were, wonderfully original.
Yeah, I'm excited to read it.
Yeah. And then the ones you wouldn't expect. Gene Hackman's one of the funniest people.
Really? That's exciting.
Paul Newman was very funny. They were great people.
I really appreciate you doing this. This
it was a pleasure.
A lot of fun. So people, please read Starflacker.
Well, I actually have that one chapter in it called "The Decade of Great Comedy."
Yes, there's another reason to read it.
Storytellers. Okay, here's some of the people: George Carlin, Mart Saul, Godfrey Cambridge, Dick Gregory, Myron Cohn, Orson Bean, Dick Shawn, Jonathan Winters, Bill Cosby, Don Rickles, Richard Pryor. Oh my God, I handled a lot of them.
That's crazy. We just talked about Rickles for the first time a couple weeks ago. Weirdly. After 7 years of this podcast, for the first time, Don Rickles.
You're kidding.
It's very weird to me. It doesn't make sense.
Well, I had another thing with him in Vegas with my wife because we went. Don Rickles was a lounge show, and so we went to the lounge. And my wife in those days was 60s, and women wore this bouffant hairdo, and so my wife had that. She was a blonde, and so he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, we got a celebrity in my audience. Ladies and gentlemen, Gorgeous George." And he says, "Stand up, stand up." And she stands up and she says, "No, I'm afraid you're terribly mistaken. I am not this Mrs. George."
Perfect. Oh my God, that's amazing. Well, thank you again for doing this.
My pleasure.
So much fun.
Well, I'm happy there are people that have this as a passion.
Me too. And I'm I'm glad that people listen.
Well, it's rewarding, and it was, some of these people were very educational. Mort Saul taught us a lot about politics.
Absolutely. Again, Mort Saul only for the first time came up this year. Very weird. Very weird after 7 years. But finally, we're getting to cover some of the stuff that I've been wanting to talk about for a long time. But I recommend you guys listen to all the stuff we've talked about.
I took somebody on his show one time, Georgie Jessel. Did Georgie ever do an album?
Yes, I do have an album of his. It's weird because it's all laugh track. So
Really?
It doesn't sound great. So you can't appreciate his stuff for what it is.
He had a talk show, and there's a great actress named Nina Foch for some orientation. She's the older woman who's supporting Gene Kelly in American Paris, and but she was one of the great actresses and teachers. So I take her to the show, and we're standing to say goodbye to him, and there was a young comedian was on the show, and he was in front of us thanking George Jessel, and Jessel said, you're a very funny comedian. I want to point something out to you. That joke that you did about the guy with one leg? And he said, got a good laugh. He says, but somewhere there's a guy with one leg, and you broke his heart, and you can only break so many hearts.
That's a good story.
And so we were walking out, and Nina said, God, I'm glad we came tonight.
Yeah.
She said, I'm so happy I heard that.
That's amazing. That's so perfect. And I'd love to hear it in his voice. But, this has been so much fun. Please go buy the book. Listen to all these albums that we've talked about. And as I say every week, have a good thing. Comedy on Vinyl is a production of Stolen Dress Entertainment. It is produced by Mike Warden and is hosted and edited by Jason Klamm. Our theme song was composed and performed by Richard Levinson. Please visit stolendress.com to listen to our other podcasts, read our blogs, read our tweets, watch our videos, and read our books. Please subscribe on iTunes, and if you like us, give us a 5-star rating and a nice review. You can find us on facebook.com/comedyonvinyl, Twitter @comedyonvinyl, and find everything else at comedyonvinyl.com. A major portion of Comedy on Vinyl has been underwritten by Stand Up Records. Please visit standuprecords.com for all your comedy needs and tune into the new Stand Up channel available on the Roku, where you can also find select episodes of this podcast.